The kids that you are seeing in this video all died a short time after this recording. They were on board a ferry en route to a once-in-a-lifetime class trip in South Korea. Unfortunately, the carelessness and negligence of others caused them to lose their lives in one of the most terrifying ways. This disaster is the reason that their class size went from hundreds to just 75. We are going to be discussing what went wrong on the Sewol ferry, what many of these kids experienced when it began to capsize and after, and I'm going to show you the videos that they recorded of their final moments. This video is going to be, at times, tough to watch. Viewer discretion advised. The day was April 16, 2014, and the hundreds of passengers, including the 15 and 16-year-old high school students, were just waking up in their cabins and getting ready for breakfast. The early birds were already at the cafeteria eating. Everyone was excited because they were due at their destination in just a matter of hours. Unbeknownst to them, the ship was heading through a channel that they had been ordered to stop taking. It was seen as an unnecessary risk due to shallow, rocky areas and unpredictable currents. The ship had already run into trouble in the past while taking this mini shortcut, but because it saved them a little bit of fuel, they proceeded. At 8:40 a.m., CCTV footage shows passengers, including some of the students, socializing on deck. A short while later, catastrophe struck, only most of the passengers did not immediately realize how much danger they were truly in. At around 8:46 a.m., the captain was absent from the bridge, which some call the wheelhouse, leaving 2 crew members. A decision was made to change the course by 5 degrees, which is about all that the ship could handle. In addition to being a passenger ship, it also shipped cargo and vehicles, and they accepted more cargo than they were legally allowed for this trip. That wasn't the only red flag. They failed to tie down a single vehicle or piece of cargo, leaving it all loose and free to slide from side to side. A sharp, large turn would be catastrophic for the balance of the ship. It doesn't end there. A large ship like the Sewol ferry also contains water near the bottom. This helps the ship to maintain balance while maneuvering, especially in turns. The decision was made to only use a fraction of the water needed in order to make more room. Also, some of the water pumps were broken. It's unclear exactly what happens next, but the ship ends up taking a 15-degree turn instead of the 5-degree turn. The end result was the ship listing about 30 degrees to the left. What this means is that it was tilting 30 degrees. Remember all of the loose cargo and vehicles? It would have began sliding, accumulating on the side dip down in the water. This would have amounted to up to over 2,000 tons of weight fighting any effort to balance out the ship. Anybody on board aware of that loose cargo knew that they were screwed. They knew that they were inevitably going to capsize. At this time, many of the students were still in their cabins. The boys were on a lower floor and the girls above. Despite the ship tilting, many of them trusted in all of the adults charged with their care to keep them safe. I would imagine that some of them believed that the tilting was just a normal part of their journey. Minutes pass, and it seemed as if the tilt was growing more severe. No announcement had yet been made. It was radio silence at this point. There were a few passengers that listened to their gut telling them that these circumstances were not, in fact, normal. The first call to emergency services was placed at 8:55 a.m. 3 minutes later, the ship sent out a distress signal. Not a single crew member made any attempt to alert passengers that they were in mortal danger at this time. Instead, at around 9 a.m., the captain decided to play an automated message demanding that passengers stay put. This was the pivotal moment. This was the moment that could have provided a much happier ending. The ship wasn't far from the coast. There were numerous large vessels in the area that could have easily provided rescue. This included a U.S. ship carrying all of the Marines and equipment needed to potentially get everyone off board safely. A distress signal had been sent, emergency calls made, and the Coast Guard was alerted only 5 minutes later. Yet, the captain decided to damn them all to the worst possible fate by ordering everyone to stay put, all the while plotting his own escape. Captain Lee changed into regular street clothes to disguise himself as a passenger and was rescued at around 9:46 a.m. He never made any attempt to tell the Coast Guard that there were hundreds of passengers still trapped on board, that the ship will certainly capsize, or that he was the captain. When asked questions, he simply did not answer, and the Coast Guard allowed it. The hundreds of students, most now wearing life jackets, had no knowledge that they had been abandoned to die. Some of them discovered their safety equipment was actually from the 1990s, and many of the zippers were broken. Water was now obviously flooding the ship, and some of the passengers were beginning to understand that they were not going to make it out. What they may not have realized was that those life jackets were actually going to rob them of any chance of survival. Life jackets are an important survival tool because they are obviously designed to help you stay afloat in water. You can preserve your energy waiting for rescue. They are, however, detrimental for passengers who are trapped inside of a sinking vessel. Once the vessel becomes submerged, you can end up pinned against the ceiling or the floor if capsized. You will be unable to swim to try to escape the vessel, something that can be difficult to do even without one. Handing out these life jackets was simply placebo from the start because the captain knew that they were all going to die simply because he made sure of it. Majority of the crew escaped the ship around the time that the captain did, but 15 of them did stay behind. A couple of them were one of the few reasons that there were some student survivors. One of them was just a part-time employee who wasn't even much older than the students. She went down with the ship and continued to alert students to the dangers and assist the injured up until she couldn't anymore. Additionally, some of the teachers were able to get some students to safety on civilian rescue boats. The teachers, like the students, trusted that the captain and crew had their best interest in mind. By the time that they realized that they were in fact going to die, they had very little time left to save people, and they also went down with the ship. One of the most harrowing pieces of footage taken while the ferry was actively sinking shows a student stuck inside of a cabin looking out of the window at civilian and Coast Guard boats there for rescue. She uses a chair to over and over again try to shatter the glass so that she can get out, but the window doesn't budge. The civilians that were there to try and save people were strictly forbidden from trying to break windows, so all that they could do was watch the students at the windows die. The truth is that by even 9:30 a.m., 15 minutes before the captain fled, it was already too late for most of the passengers. They were trapped. They could no longer evacuate their quarters due to the state of the ship. It was completely on its side with too much of it underwater. It's highly likely that at least some passengers had been gravely injured from falling or falling debris. For the passengers who found themselves in rooms not yet submerged or with air pockets, they likely survived for much longer. But for what? They may have maintained hope that someone might still come for them, but the devastating truth is that nobody would. After rescuing the captain and crew members, the South Korean Coast Guard simply quit. They spent the next few days pretending to launch a rescue. A helicopter and boat circled the ship but did nothing more. They also prevented volunteer divers from going down during those crucial few hours. The president of South Korea failed to intervene in any meaningful way. The U.S. Marine ship was denied the ability to offer help on several occasions. The 304 passengers trapped on the ship eventually drowned to death, and for some, it may have taken a full day or longer. The water temperature was not cold water shock cold, but it was hypothermia after prolonged exposure cold. Many likely tried to keep their heads above water as long as possible until they couldn't anymore. Many of the students huddled together, even tying themselves to one another. If they found air pockets, they may have been partially submerged in that frigid water where their skin would begin to sear as if being burned from the cold. Their fingers and toes would stop functioning normally, followed by hands and feet, and then arms and legs. The truly sad reality is that they might have had to watch their peers die before they did. They would have been utterly terrified and experiencing an impending sense of doom on a physiological and circumstantial level. Rising carbon dioxide levels in the blood naturally causes immense panic, which happens with drowning. Adding further to their panic would be all of the ominous sounds surrounding them. There would be an eerie screeching and even groaning sound as metal buckles and tears. There would be jarring bangs similar to gunshots as smaller compartments rupture. There would be violent snapping plus a roaring sound of confined rushing water. That doesn't include all of the different human sounds of distress. When you try to imagine these sounds, also imagine complete darkness. At 10:23 a.m., the ship completely capsized. It was upside down, submerging all of the windows in the water. A little over 30 minutes later, the first body was found. Anyone inside of an air pocket could have still been alive, but nobody was being allowed down far enough to look. There certainly wouldn't be enough trapped air present for most to postpone drowning at this point. Majority trapped would be dead or actively drowning. At 2 p.m., only the bow of the ship was peeking out of the water, where it would stay visible until nightfall. By that point, majority, if not all passengers, were dead. Drowning is the type of death that happens in minutes, but can feel like hours. This is largely due to the panic that it creates. It's not a pain-free panic either. Your chest will feel tight, your nostrils and esophagus will sear, your sinus cavities will pulsate. The burn in your lungs will crescendo until you feel as if you are aspirating acid. Unless in extremely cold water, your instinct will be to hold your breath for as long as possible, but you will inevitably reach the breaking point. As carbon dioxide builds and builds in your blood, it not only feeds the panic, but it will cause your brain to force an involuntary breath. It cannot be stopped. This occurs on average 87 seconds from the moment oxygen is cut off. The Sewol ferry sank in salt water, which means that the passengers would have been aspirating salt water into their lungs and upper airways. This creates a higher level of pain compared to fresh water. With fresh water, it will irritate the tissue, but with salt water, it will irritate all while drawing fluid from the tissue, forcing it into the airways and air sacs in the lungs. This will add an immense pressure to the intense burning. Additionally, it's safe to assume that many passengers didn't just go under and drown. They would be dealing with rising water levels. This can draw it out for hours. The parents of the victims were the only people able to competently organize in any kind of fashion. Some even obtained access to a boat to get to the wrecking ship. Sadly, due to government mishandling, they arrived too late. This was because the news media and government told the first of many lies to come. The news stations claimed shortly after the distress signal that every passenger had been rescued. This deterred volunteers from coming to help and set the parents up for the worst rug pulling of their lives. The one thing that the parents in the boat were able to do was hold the Coast Guard accountable. When they claimed that they were performing diving rescues all through the night, they could call out the lie because they were there. One father of a victim discovered that his son had recorded some videos during the time that the ship was actively sinking. Because the ferry stayed close enough to shore, passengers still had cell service. The footage had been uploaded to the cloud where he could access it. He alerted the other parents, and soon they too were checking the cloud. They worked with the only honest news station that they could find to release it all. They made sure that every citizen of South Korea and beyond was aware of the massacre that occurred on the Sewol ferry.
우리 뒤지기 싫어요. 뒤지기 싫어요. 이런 거 사진 찍어야 돼. 이런 걸 마지막 기념으로 찍어. 아마 이렇게 찍어야죠. 생명을 무시한 사나이 하면서. 타이타닉 찍은 거 같아요. 전화 안 터진다고? 안 터져. 아, 망했다. 마지막 갈만에 남기고 중간에 들어갔는데. 자, 지금 남겨. 녹음해. 녹음이야, 지금 동영상이야. 제발. 할 수가 있어요. 엄마 아빠 사랑해.
기울어졌어. 야, 나 좀 살려줘.
현재 자리에서 움직이지 마시고 안전으로 자꾸 대기해주시기 바랍니다.
이거 상황이 아니야. 이거 실제라고.
야, 누구 구명조끼 좀 뭐 할 거야, 알아?
아니, 뭘 꺼내. 아, 씨발, 저 상황이 어떻게 좋아할지 모르잖아. 와, 기울 줄은 상상도 못했다. 우리 뒤지기 싫다고. 이게 뭔 상황인지 모르겠어. 구명조끼 입으라는 거 침몰되고 있다는 소리 아니야? 여기 만약에.
야, 나 진짜 죽는 거 아니야?
이거 상황이 아니야. 이거 실제라고.
야, 누구 구명조끼 좀 뭐 할 거야, 알아?
아니, 뭘 꺼내. 뉴스 뜬다. 야, 내가 확실히 100% 한다. 이거 뉴스 뜬다.
안 떠, 이런 걸로.
아니야,
침몰
이거
안 하면.
지금 침몰하는데?
엄마 사랑해요.
나도 하나만.
아빠 사랑해요. 둘 다 사랑해요.
구명조끼 입으라는 거 침몰되고 있다는 소리 아니야? 애기까지 미치겠다. 아, 실제 상황이야.
The captain of the ship was arrested and eventually sentenced to life in prison. He became the most hated man in South Korea. The only excuse that he gave for his actions was that they didn't have enough life vests and equipment to save the passengers, so he told them to stay put. Government mishandling didn't end with the absolute lack of rescue. It took them years to finally recover the ship, which means that it took years for loved ones to lay the victims to rest. To this day, 9 passengers are still missing. Most of the victims that were recovered was thanks to the volunteer civilian divers, the ones forbidden from diving when the victims could have still been alive. Many of them destroyed their bodies working long hours day after day recovering them. Many sustained life-altering injuries, some died, and all suffered severe ramifications to their mental health. The government refused to cover the cost of their medical bills and went on to take credit for their work. The word Sewol means time, which I find ironic for multiple reasons. For one, it was only a matter of time before catastrophe struck this ship. When it did strike, time is what they would have been fighting in order to save the victims. Instead, they just let time run out, allowing all 304 people stuck in the ship to die.